Fuck, wait.
It is a Saturday in February in 2025, and we are introducing our very first episode with a guest in which we spoke with Martha Brockenbrough. I had a really good feeling after that call. What did you think?
I was absolutely enraptured the entire time, which is evident in the recording because I think I speak once, only after being prompted by Karis, which we didn't really know how the interview process was going to go. I suspected, since Karis is so fantastic at interviewing people, that I would mostly be tech support on the call, which I was, which I'm fine with.
And then I was the teacher who called on you in the middle of class to be like, haven't heard much from Addie yet. What do you think?
Which is always the best feeling in the world.
That's why everyone loves those teachers
so much. No, I think that this episode was just really a fantastic overview of what craft is. And Martha especially is so knowledgeable, and the way that she explains things just makes so much sense that I truly just felt that I was receiving a masterclass in the overview that is craft.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to go spend a weekend at a retreat house that Martha has in Washington last October. And I went with some classmates and we were chatting. And Martha was like, does anyone have any questions about like craft or publishing? And I was like, yeah, Martha, I got a question. How do you handle it when your publishing career is taking 5 bajillion years to get started? And her answer, which I don't remember word for word, was the most helpful one that I've received in the over 18 months that I've spent trying to get my book published on Sub. So we love Martha in this household.
We do. We love Martha.
Yeah. But before we read you Martha's bio and dive straight into the interview, I would love to know, Addie, what is one thing, writing related or not, that has brought you joy this week?
Oh, what a good question.
Thank you.
And what a hard question for this week.
Fair.
I would say this is going to be based in consumerism, but that's okay. Me and my lemon spindrift. I have one lemon spindrift. Do you know what spindrift is? It's
no.
I'm going to introduce this to you. It's changed my life. Well, caveat, you have to like sparkling water.
Oh, no.
Oh.
Spicy water? No.
Huh? Well, okay. It's sort of like if sparkling water and soda had a crunchy baby, which is, I'm pitching this really horribly, but it's like a really refreshing, like sparkling water infused with it's not even infused with, like they actually put lemon water in it. And and so like it just tastes really fresh and like it's also just water and lemons essentially. So there's very little sugar. Which is great because I have an addiction to soda and have started using Spindrift instead of Le Soda. On recommendation of my dentist. I don't think that they like the fact that I'm using Spindrift, but you know, look, an addict is an addict, and I'm trying my best. But that's that the one Spindrift that I have a day, I will usually have it with my lunch, and it has oddly been like very comforting. To me, for some reason, I need my sparkling beverages to get me through this administration. That's my moment of joy.
It's the little things, frankly. My moment of joy this week was Sapphic literary speed dating at Barnes & Noble. And it was joyful because I met a bunch of really rad people. I had fun. And also, it kind of felt like a big, middle finger to the administration to be like, oh, you don't want us to exist? We're just going to gather and, like, make more friends.
Yeah. You don't think we exist? Bitch, we fucking do.
Fuck yeah.
And we're going to get together and do some things.
Yeah, we're going to talk about books. I did very vehemently spread the gospel of Legendborn. At one point someone asked me like, it was like, what book is your Roman Empire? And I was like, well, the Legendborn cycle. And the person I was talking to was like, let me write that down as like a recommendation. And the person next to her, whom I hadn't actually spoken to, leans over and goes, I just got that recommendation too. And then like the four of us had like a 30-second moment of like, Legendborn.
Amazing. Karis, can I confess
You haven't
something
read
to you
Legendborn?
that I'm No, I haven't. And I need to. I
I
have the
know
first
you do
book.
need to.
I like it is Do you ever have those things where like something is so going to be your thing?
Yeah.
Like it is just like you're just you're going to be obsessed with it. You're going to love it, but you like can't touch it yet cuz the anticipation is so great that you're like I need to save this moment for what I really need
Well,
it.
here's the thing. Book 3 comes out in just over a month. So you can just binge Legendborn and Bloodmarked and be ready to rock and to roll with Oathbound.
There we go. See, past me was thinking ahead. Now I just get to consume all
And
three. And I'm so sorry to all of you who had to wait.
no, you should be. It's a long wait, but it's worth it. But yeah, that was my pocket of joy. So do you want to let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Do you want to read Martha's bio?
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So, um all right, Martha Brockenbrough is the author of more than 20 books for young readers, including YA fiction and nonfiction picture books, a middle grade mystery, and a chapter book series. She founded National Grammar Day, wrote game questions for Cranium and Trivial Pursuit, and was co-chair of faculty at VCFA's MFA in Writing for Children and Young Adults program. The former editor of MSN.com, Martha has interviewed lots of celebrities, including the Jonas Brothers, Jason Bateman, Mike Myers, and Slash. Her work has been published in the New York Times. She also wrote an educational humor column for Encarta for 9 years. She lives in Seattle with her family. Besides reading and writing, she likes dogs, cats, cooking, working out, and laughing. And with that,
All right, we're here. All right, thank you, Martha, so much for being with us today. We are here to chat the basics of craft. When I say craft, I do mean writing craft, not arts and crafts. For anyone listening, that's the wrong podcast. So Martha, my first question for you is just very basic. If you had to define the concept of writing craft to a non-writer, how would you define it?
Okay. So I would define it as the magic that happens between the lines. You know, writing is just ink on paper, right? It's just words. It's just and yet it's magic. And craft are all the skills that we have to transform words into things that make you believe stuff that is not really happening, but it gives you real emotions. Some people would call this mind control, which is evil. But I just think it's the craft of writing, and it's what turns spelling into magic, grammar. It's all that stuff.
I love that. It's what turns spelling into spells. That's perfect. I remember I started at VCFA, which is the Vermont College of Fine Arts, where Martha was co-chair about 3 years ago now. And my first advisor was the amazing Jasmine Warga, who is possibly the most brilliant person in the world. I couldn't say for sure, but she is. But my first letter that I sent to her, I was supposed to talk about craft elements in my piece, and I just drew a blank. So I asked her, what is craft? So I really love your super concise and neat explanation of it. What would you define as like, what are some of the puzzle pieces that go into craft, or like the ingredients of the craft soup?
Okay. Well, so, if we're building something, we've got hammers, which pound in nails. We've got screws and screwdrivers, several types that drive them in. Elements of the writing craft are just like those tools. So a central one be character. Who's the story about? What makes this person tick? What do they believe? What are they so certain is true at the outset of their transformative journey that they realize, oh my goodness, not true at the end? Or, what belief do they have that is transformed? I mean, character is a whole bunch of things. Like, we are who we are. So, we're where we were born. We're who we grew up with. We're the foods that we ate. We're the sounds that we heard. We're the music that we listened to. We're the movies that we watched, the books that we read. We're our heartbreaks. We are the pets that we've had and loved. All these things that go into making a person and making their beliefs. And so this is like the center of what a story is. And there are some things that I described, like where we grew up, that people would say, oh, well, but that's setting, right? It is. And setting is a separate entity. And yet, certain settings are totally intertwined with character, like your room. Those of you who are listening, I'm looking at Karis right now on video, and I can see a rainbow flag back there. That means something very specific, right? But someone who didn't have that cultural knowledge wouldn't know what that meant. A 5-year-old might think, oh, it's just a pretty rainbow. And so these are the ways that setting is different depending on whether it's new to you or whether it's familiar. So, yes, setting is an important element of craft. Plot is important. And it's always interesting to me when people say, oh, I can't do plot. And this is something that I say all the time. And then I slap myself silly and say, no, of course. Plot is what happens to the character. And the shape that the plot takes is determined by who the character is and where the thing happened to them. If it's a storm outside and you're inside, it's less of an important plot event than, let's say, you were outside walking home from school and all of a sudden, a storm hits. Becomes totally different. So all these elements, they interplay together. Structure is one of my favorite elements of craft. That is how you tell it. Do you tell it in linear fashion, or do you tell it in reverse? Do you break it up a little bit? A book that I really love is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. And it took me a little while to figure out, like, what is happening? And then I started paying attention to the dates, and she breaks up, it jumps back and forth in time. And that is something that increases the tension of your story. And so, like, as you're thinking about, well, how do I make the tools work for me? Structure becomes one that you can increase the tension. You can let your reader know that something horrible is going to happen by starting off. There's this book by Charles Benoit called You, and it starts off with the main character describing a fatal injury that they've just sustained.
Oh, wow.
So it's fairly tense. Like, how did they get there, and what happened, and what's going to happen next, and are they really going to die? No spoilers, but yeah. Anyway, so plot, we've got setting, we've got character, we've got structure. Those are some of the big ones. Voice also is significant, and people are like, oh, what's voice? Well, it's just, how does the story sound and how does it make you feel? Like, if we're listening to Cookie Monster, very specific voice has. That's actually, I was a little more like Yoda. But you know what I mean? Like, and you get an emotional effect based on the voice. And one of my writing students, this high school senior, who is neurodivergent, and that was, by the way, my cat knocking over some stuff in my office.
Classic cat.
And so what he does is he'll say, okay, the voice of this character is like this, and he'll send me a song or something from a musical or whatever, and all of a sudden it's like this distilled thing, and I get it, and so I understand what he's doing, and his writing is really consistent and interesting. And so this is one of these things that voice is developed by listening, and you can listen to anything from Martha Stewart to a Muppet and get inspiration for what the voice of your character might be. Those are some craft elements.
That was amazing. That was like a masterclass in craft elements. And I had a million thoughts as you were talking, and I was like, file that away for later. And now it's later. And they're gone because everything that you said was just so much more brilliant than the first. So I loved, okay, I'm formulating my thought as I'm speaking, but when I first started writing, I didn't put too much thought into what I was writing. I would just sit down and I would put my hands on the keyboard and I would see where the story took me. And I wrote like 4 books like this, and I queried 2 of them, which was foolish, but I mean, I was young and full of dreams. And one thing that I have learned lately about craft is that there's a lot of intentionality in writing, or in the best of writing, it feels like. So when you're writing your first draft, are you thinking all of these craft thoughts? Are you putting every single layer of the story into the first draft, or is this like a process?
Oh yeah, definitely not. I mean, I wish that I could, but in a way, so all right, my house is 36 steps above the street. When I go grocery shopping, I would really love to make just one trip up with all of the bags. Can I? No, I cannot. And it's too much, it's too awkward, and ultimately it's more efficient to make many light trips. And I think this is a really good way of viewing writing. We're just making many light trips up the stairs. And the reason for that is, like, you probably could climb the stairs one time carrying hundreds of pounds of soup. But you would never want to do it again, and you might get hurt on the way. The bag might rip, the soup might drop and spill. Better just to do what you can. And like, writing a novel is a huge undertaking. So how can you break it down? How can you just get one thing done today? So I've recently started on a new novel, and it's one that's going to require a ton of research. I am not doing all of that research at one time because it's too much. And so I've divided my novel into chunks. Where and when does this take place? Where and when does that take place? And so I'm sort of writing the pieces as I go. And that is one way that I am breaking down. And so, yeah, you just, some people maybe can get a first draft that has everything in it. But I am happy when the first draft has enough in it that I still care.
Nice. I love the grocery metaphor, because I'm that person who's like, I'm only doing one trip. It doesn't matter if I fall over halfway up the stairs and break my back and also all of the bags. And I feel that way sometimes with writing too, where I'm like, I just want to get it done. So I really love that. Like, it's like a reframing and a new way of looking at it.
Yeah, you can only do so much at one time. And you can always make something better and more magical. Alana K. Arnold sometimes goes back over scenes, and she describes what she's doing as thickening them. And I really like that, because it does feel like that. You're adding just, once you've kind of got down, like, here's my character, here's where they are, here's what they want, here are the obstacles, their antagonists, whatever. And you kind of get the basics down, then you can always thicken it. Sometimes it's cutting stuff out, but sometimes it's just adding little things or little misdirection. And that is really fun. Like, once you know what you're doing, but you don't really know what you're doing until you've got a draft.
I think that's also really helpful for specifically new writers who might be feeling overwhelmed. I know when I first started learning about craft and techniques to make the book shine and things like various acts and the denouement and the climax and, everything like that, I was like, how am I going to do this? That's impossible. So breaking it into steps, kind of, I like to joke that it's like Shrek, because Shrek is like an onion and an onion has layers. So that it's a convoluted metaphor, but I like it.
No, I get it. I get it. But okay. So do you remember learning to walk?
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit. Okay. Walking's really complicated. And yet you learned how to do it. Nobody taught you the craft of walking. You just kind of kept trying and got used to it and practiced. Okay. So writing is also like that. There's a whole bunch of skills to learn. And there's a lot of stuff that you already know from reading. If you've read a lot of books, you already know a bunch about craft. You just don't know that you know it. And so this is where it's okay just to write from the heart, to write from the gut. All right. Then once you've got something, then you can introduce your brain and say, okay, so what am I really doing here and what's really happening, and slow it down and, then analyze. The problems come when, okay, so there's writing without understanding any craft at all, and probably you're only going to get so far. Then there's like when you start to study the craft and you've got all these concepts in your head and they're just in your head. You haven't yet practiced them enough so that they're in your body, like walking is. And so it's going to be really super unwieldy. And, as I do this kind of consulting thing called novel therapy, and people will sit with me and I'll talk to them about, here's your character, here's what you're working on. I'll ask questions. And the idea is to help them see their story and just feel their way forward. So I had this one wonderful client who was like, okay, but here's all the character archetypes and here's their relationships and I was like, no. What does your character want? Like, stop thinking about your story as this big, complex interplay, and what your character wants and believes and what their limitations are. Everything else comes out of that. Like, there is no, platonic form of the story where you can just fill in all these boxes and then have your writing emerge to fill that. I mean, maybe someday some lunatic will make the artificial intelligence algorithm that does that. But it just, good stories feel organic. And that means they've come from lived experience that's been expressed through the artistic mediums of, a specific character you've created. They're not check boxes and formulas, although those things can help later.
I like that. In addition to writing novels, I write a lot of personal essays. And one thing I learned during my training as a personal essayist is that the best essays are very specific, like it's about my experience growing up, how I grew up with the parents I had. And then maybe there's something universal to come from that. But if I try to write a piece that's going to be universal, it's not going to tick for anyone. And that's what I was thinking when you said, like, you start with your character specifics rather than the overarching huge umbrella of the novel. It always makes more sense to start narrowed in and focused and with a small detail. And then you can slowly expand and build your world.
Yes, that's exactly, for me, that's how it works. And, there's as many ways to write probably as there are writers. But my favorite kind of craft advice is the advice that helps me get words on the page. And that helps me feel like my story is moving somewhere. And so this is where, another thing that I think about when I'm starting off with this character and what they believe and kind of, knowing what's going to happen to them is where might they be at the end? And how might they get there? And there's going to be surprises along the way. But I've got this character who, believes what his gods and his country tell him, and supports wars being waged in the name of God and country. And at the end of the story is going to have a very different view. And so how do I get him there? And I know that's like the shape of the story that I want to write. And so those are things that become constraints. And so this is where my character believes, well, why does he believe this at the beginning? And, what are the things that are going to happen to him to question those beliefs?
So now that we've talked a lot about overarching, just general craft, I would love to know if you have suggestions for self-teaching, teaching yourself craft. Like what books would you recommend? What would you recommend? Like, do people need to get MFAs in order to become good writers?
Okay, so let's talk about the MFA thing. I don't have one. I wish that I did. I was just not able to get one and do the freelance writing that I was doing, and I was homeschooling my kids. It didn't work out for me. I absolutely loved being part of the VCFA community, and I loved teaching. You don't need an MFA to be a published writer. You don't even need an MFA to teach in an MFA program. So what's the point of an MFA? So the point of an MFA is that it is worth studying something you love in community with other people who become your fellow travelers, through life. It is worth building these relationships. So how do you teach yourself writing without that? I read a ton of books, and when I really loved a book, I would have a notebook and write down, here's what's happening and here's why it's working on me. I mean, very similar thing that you might do in an MFA program is write, they're called critical essays. I think craft essay is a better term for them. But in The Book Thief, death is the narrator and death tells you who's going to die. So why do spoilers make The Book Thief a more gripping read? And so I would write myself little things that explained that and explained, why choices had the effect on me that they did. I also was in a critique group of other serious writers, and, many people in that group have gone on. I think pretty much all have gone on to publish. And so that was another thing. I used to go to conferences and, just listen to people. So it's just as much as you can immerse yourself in how books work. And as you're doing that, ponder who you are and what you believe about things. What's your point of view as an artist and as a writer, and what do you have that's new? And so there's what happens in books, but then there's what happens in you. And great books are made by people who are fascinated with what it means to be alive, and who have some things to say, and who know how to conjure up the emotional experiences on the page that will make readers think. And that's what makes books so incredibly magical. So anyway, yeah, you don't need an MFA. You can kind of give yourself, it's funny, Nova Ren Suma and I had this Facebook group we called Rogue MFA, and we were like just doing it on our own. And then she went to teach at VCFA, and I followed her there. And so, this work is for people who love the work, and it's. I mean, I love doing it because it makes me humble. It continually asks me to be compassionate. It feeds my curiosity. It demands constant reinvention. I mean, all things that I think make for a good life. And the kind of truth telling that we aspire to do on the page, the understanding of what courage looks like. As you spend your life writing this way, I think you can make yourself into a better person. And that's pretty satisfying.
I really like that because I have long been a believer in a very controversial take, which is that you cannot separate the art from the artist. And because so much of art comes from who we are deep inside, and even just the way I view the world, and my biases or my shortcomings mean that maybe I don't see something one way. And so, of course, my art is intrinsically tied to who I am and how I act in the world. And I almost just like went. I was like, and that's why we don't read Hillbilly Elegy. There's lots of reasons for why we don't read that.
It's interesting. And okay. So I agree with you. You cannot separate the artist from the art. Like, the only times people want to is when the person creating it is so reprehensible. So, and sometimes we don't find out that they're reprehensible until after we have internalized the patterns of their work and made them part of their identity or identities and love them. And so it can be hard to let that go. And so, you don't have to. I mean, you could still like those books. You could still read those things. But, for me, that's the point where I stop supporting and promoting that art publicly, because guess what? There is not a shortage of artistic brilliance. What we have a shortage of is attention. What we have a shortage of is ways of finding this great stuff. And so I would rather, once someone has been JKR'd, once someone has been exposed to be a Neil Gaiman, find someone else. And guess what? They're already out there, and we've been reading them, and there's more people, and there's going to be more new writers, and that is who deserves our time and attention, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. There is not a shortage of brilliance in the world, and this is something I've learned partly, from being in writing groups, partly from being at VCFA. I'd run into people and read their work, and I was like, well, shoot, you're really good too. Like, how is everyone so good? And so I really love that, the idea of like when, sometimes artists disappoint us, and so we can find new artists to support and hope that they don't disappoint us too. But there's always going to be more art and more brilliance.
Yes.
Let's see. Do you have like a piece of craft advice that you have been told or that you hear a lot that you think is just abysmal?
Well, some people only share craft advice because it works for them. And so I'm all over, if it works for you, booyah. So it's hard. And if it's something that doesn't work for me, my brain's like, let it go, let it go. And so I'm much better at like what works for me. I guess. Oh yeah. Chuck Palahniuk has some dumb stuff that he says, where he doesn't want to see your characters thinking or feeling anything. It should all be shown, and you cannot use those words. And I'm like, yeah, you can. And it's still, there's plenty of books that readers respond to that, don't follow the Chuck Palahniuk advice. And so sometimes when people give advice like that, that's so like restrictive, I don't find that to be particularly helpful. So yeah, that's it. Sorry, Chuck. What the Chuck?
I think he can handle it.
We just fucked off.
And what about so it, like you just said, there's no like universal piece of advice, right? Like for one person, making an outline will be revolutionary, and for another person, making an outline will absolutely stifle them. But what is maybe a basic like piece of overarching craft advice that really works for you?
Okay. So this is one, gosh, maybe 12 years ago, I was taking a class from the great Anne Ursu. And I was struggling to finish The Game of Love and Death. Because I wanted to carry all the groceries up the stairs. I wanted it to be good, blah, blah, blah. And I just like kept getting to this point and started running out of steam. And so what Anne said is just write to the end. Stop messing with the beginning. Don't worry. Just write to the end. And so I did. I took that class with her in November, and I think by January I had finished the draft. And it was only once I had a draft that I could really start making the book good. It was always a good idea. And what's funny, like I used to read Goodreads. I don't anymore, but what is somebody said, in another writer's hands, this book would have been so good because it's a really good idea. This is why we don't read Goodreads. So yes, there's the idea behind the book, and I knew it was a good idea, but execution, of course, is the hard part. And that takes stamina.
Yes. Stamina. That is an maybe undervalued like attribute that writers need. I didn't realize this when I was a new writer. I was like, I can write a book and I'll publish it and do this for the next 70 years. And it didn't occur to me that would be hard work and I would need to like be, have stamina. So something I've learned over the years. I have 2 questions that I think I'm going to put later, but before we do, is there anything else? They're like closing questions. Is there anything else that like comes to your mind that you want to share, or anything that you wish I had asked?
Okay. So like, how do you get through a whole draft of a book? Because that's the hard part, right? And so I've found lots of little ways that help me. And maybe they help you, maybe they'll help someone. Maybe you can come up with a variation. When I'm drafting, I like to, I know roughly, okay, this is going to be 80,000 words or whatever. And so I set daily goals, and I check in with friends. And so that's a really helpful thing. And one of the things I noticed, and keeping track of stuff on a spreadsheet, if I'm a steady writer, if I kind of go about it like every day, just a little bit, it's better than if I try to get, I just wrote 8,000 words and then I'm spent. Okay. So slow and steady and keeping track. That's one thing. Another thing is keep track of what story you're writing. And so I am not big on outlines because I find that starts to make it be outside in rather than inside out. But I do love to write a short synopsis of the book that I'm writing, and just a page. And I give myself 20 minutes to write it. Just that whole just letting it flow on out. That's where I do that. And then as I'm drafting and I get stuck, I just look at is there anything here that's useful? And as my story wends and takes more distinct shape, I change that rough synopsis so that then by the end, I kind of have an actual synopsis of what has happened in the book. So little bits of progress every day if you can. And, keep like a thumbnail sized view of your big picture so you know where you're going. So it's like you got your map, your synopsis, and then every day you get your little walk in. And the best place to write often is not at your keyboard. So if you're washing dishes, or if you're on a commute, or if you can't fall asleep or whatever, think about your story, think about a scene. And I very often will kind of come up with ideas, and then I'm very excited when I hit the keyboard because my hindbrain has already been at work for me. So yeah.
Very nice. Addie, is there anything that you have a burning craft question?
I don't. I'm just in awe of this entire conversation. It's been fantastic. No, it's been just great.
All
I feel
right.
like I got an MFA.
Right? The beauty of talking to Martha Brockenbrough. You get an MFA in 33 minutes.
And you get an MFA, and you get an
MFA. So this is a silly question. And I love silliness, so we're asking it. But are you familiar with the concept of like a hear me out? Like a person that you're like, nobody would ever go for this person, but like, hear me out.
I'm
Okay.
familiar.
So, and the bookish community loves our villains. So who is your book villain? Hear me out. Who had a point?
Oh my goodness. So many Okay. I'm gonna hear me out. The Runaway Bunny. The Runaway Bunny is an absolute nightmare story. It's the Terminator, but with bunnies. Mom's like, I'm gonna follow you, I'm gonna chase you, anyway. She's the villain of that story, and yet, hear me out. She just loves her kid and doesn't want her bunny to get turned into a pie or whatever. So there we go. Hear me out. The Runaway Bunny, the mom is the Terminator, and yet I totally get it.
Makes sense. Moms often have a point, even when you don't want them to. I hope my mom's not listening to this, because then I'll never hear the end of it. That, I believe, is all the questions that I had prepared. So unless Addie or you, Martha, have anything else you would like to add, I believe that is our interview.
Okay, I want to add one thing. We are entering a hard time in the history of this country. There have been hard times before. Hard times are the crucible for great art. And so I want people to feel all the hard times. I want people to care about everyone who is in danger and is suffering. I want everyone to write bold and brave stories and be unabashed in this. Let us take this hard time and make some of the best art the world has ever seen.
And that was our show. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Right Way of Life. This show is brought to you by host Karis Rogerson and A.D. Jolietta, and morally supported by Alex Abraham. Find us on socials at The Right Way of Life and leave us a message or a comment telling us what you thought of today's episode. Stay safe, write great things, and always remember to live life the right way.